Syracuse basketball. Here are my official predictions for the 2025-26 season. We go through the schedule, give you my regular season win-loss predictions, and then the back half of this video, we're going to jump into the rotation and give you guys my thoughts as to what I think it's going to be. So let's jump right into it. All right, we've got the schedule pulled up here for Syracuse. We're going to go through it game by game. Not going to talk about every matchup, but I'll give you my non-conference predictions and then my conference predictions for the Orange. So they start off with a number of easier opponents, and then they jump into the Players Era Men's Championship. One quick note, though, this St. Joseph's game, I am not sure if that's going to be happening. I know I was reading something. They're talking about potentially moving the location of this game to another venue. Or changing it entirely to another opponent. So something to keep an eye out there. But for now, we're going to include it in our predictions. In the Players Era Championship, they somehow ended up with Houston and then Kansas. Back-to-back days. The Houston one, it's basketball. Anything can happen. But I would be very surprised if Syracuse beats Houston. I will say, though, Syracuse offensively should have the firepower to at least make that game competitive. That's been the one thing that's given Houston's defense some teams with offensive firepower. The Kansas game, though, I do think is certainly the more winnable of the two. Darren Peterson is awesome, but the rest of that team is not much different than the Syracuse roster. So I think that game is winnable. And I think I have no idea who they're going to play in the third game of the Players Era Men's Championship here. But we're going to go ahead and chalk that up as a win. The ACC-SEC Challenge is also interesting because it's Tennessee, which has been, especially the last two seasons, one of the better teams in college basketball. But this year, I do have some questions about that team. They're having a little bit of a changeover, certainly an identity, which they've lost over the past couple of seasons. It's at Syracuse. I think that's a plus for the Orange. I'm still going to pick Tennessee to win this one, but I think between this game and the Kansas game, there's an opportunity for the Orange to get a W, and then the rest, Hofstra, Mercyhurst, Northeastern, Stonehill College, is not much until you get to conference play. So before we start conference play, please like this video. It really means a lot. Helps with the algorithm here. I've got Syracuse going 10-3 in non-conference. I got them winning the third Players Era championship game. I do think they could beat Kansas or Tennessee, but for now we're going to have those as losses. In conference play, they start off with Clemson at home. They go to Georgia Tech, which is one of the more difficult places to play in the ACC. They've got Pittsburgh as well on the road. I'm not sure what this Pittsburgh team's going to look like. Florida State at home. Boston College on the road. You've got Virginia Tech and Miami coming to Syracuse. NC State on the road is going to be a tough game. Notre Dame comes to Syracuse. Road games at North Carolina and Virginia. I think that's going to be a tough stretch of the schedule. And then home games with California, SMU. They go on the road again to Durham, taking on Duke. North Carolina at home before wrapping up the regular season with a pair of road games at Wake Forest and Louisville, and a home game with Pittsburgh. Look, I've got them going 11-7 in conference play. I think there's a number of winnable games in conference, but I do think the ACC is going to be better than last year. I think it's going to be stronger, certainly in the middle of the conference, and I think even the upper end of the conference is going to be better. I think it's going to help with the tournament, but I think when you combine where I had them 11-7 in conference, 10-3 non-conference, I got them 21-10 right now, which I think puts them solidly on the bubble and maybe even favors them to get into the tournament. If they could pick up a win like with Kansas and Tennessee and especially win that third game of the Players Era tournament, I think that would solidly get them into the tournament. But I think, as we'll get into here, with this rotation, a lot is going to come down to the defensive end of the court for Syracuse, not so much the offensive end of the court. And we're going to talk about that as we go through this roster. So I've got the depth chart, how I see it on the left, and on the right is the rotation. And I'm not totally sold. Well, I have it. So you can't see who the players are right now, but I'm not really sure as to how this is going to shake out because I think there's a couple of players who I feel very confident in, and I think there's a lot of competition for spots in this team, which I think is a great problem to have for Syracuse. So the point guard, well, let's actually just do this. The backcourt for Syracuse is not a point of contention. You've got Nate George, leading assist man from the ACC last year, which I think is an awesome thing to have as a transfer. You know he can compete in the conference. And J.J. Starling, the leading scorer from Syracuse last year, pretty easy. I don't think you guys need me to say much more than that. Now, what I will say, just talking a little bit about the players specifically here, I think what George is going to do in terms of table setting, just making things easier there's a lot of scorers on this roster. So I think there's a really nice synergy between what George can do and a guy like Starling who can now play more off the ball. Hopefully this can help Starling be more efficient as a scorer, which I think would help the team as a whole. The one question I have, we talked about this a little bit, I talked about this a little bit, there's no one else here, is the defense. And a backcourt of Starling and George is certainly not a defensive backcourt that's going to, really scare opponents. Now, offensively, it's really good. But defensively, it does leave a little bit to be desired. Now, this is where I am open to conversation because, quite frankly, I'm not settled here. I've got Sadiq White starting at the 3 spot. And part of the reason why I've got Sadiq White starting at the 3 is defense. Now, some of this is because I'm not super familiar with Nate King's game, having only watched a little bit. I know, and I guess a little bit of a spoiler, I have him positioned as the 6th man right now. So I do think Nate King's could be starting instead of Sadiq White. But there's a couple of reasons why I've got White there instead of King's for now. But I got him playing the same number of minutes. The defense, the size, the rebounding, those are the reasons. I think White, I'm not sure about his ability to be like a consistent team defender coming from high school. He's much bigger at 6'8", 6'9", than Kings, who's right around 6'5". He's a really awesome athlete, and I think he'll add something also with the rebounding for this team, which I think is not necessarily a major concern, but they don't have a center that's going to play that's a traditional 7-footer or even a 6'11", 6'10" guy. And so I think getting more help from other positions with the rebounding is going to be important for Syracuse this year. But one guy who's going to help with that is Donnie Freeman, the 6'9" sophomore, really, really talented player, can shoot the ball. I think a front court combination of Freeman and White is really athletic, versatile, can do a lot of different things for you, both offensively and defensively. Freeman is a little bit more of the shooter, whereas White more of the slasher, but yeah, I really like that pairing in the front court. And I have, after reading a bunch, I wasn't sure who this was going to be, but from reading a bunch of Syracuse articles, I think William Kyle is going to be the guy who gets the nod to start at center. And I think Kyle didn't play much for UCLA last year, but 6'9", 230 pounds or so, can get the job done at the center spot. Like I said, a little bit undersized, but maybe makes up for that with the ability to be more mobile, switch a little bit more, etc. Now, we talked about this a little bit before, but right now I've got Nate Kings as the 6th man. And Kings, the number one thing I think he brings to this team is the three-point shooting ability. Tremendous shooter. I think he's the best shooter on this team. That's why part of the reason why I think he could end up starting. It's just when you've got the backcourt of George and Starling, you may want to opt for a little bit more defense, but you may also want that shooter alongside George and Starling continue to the space rather than White, who's going to kind of take away some of that space, and he's not the threat from the outside. So I think you could easily get to something where it's more like Kings here and White is your sixth man. I think that would also make a ton of sense. You bring in White for his versatility, athleticism, kind of brings in a different gear to the team. And then your seventh man is Keon Anthony, who I think is going to give them shot making, decent size from the wings. This team has a lot of depth in the wings. I would say the wings of this team. It's just that's a strength. It's the one area of this team where if there's an injury, I think they'll be just fine. The other spots where I don't think they'll be fine, point guard, Nate George, I don't have a lot of confidence in the depth behind him there. And the center spot, they just don't have a lot of depth at the center spot. And right now I've got, as the backup five, Ibrahim Traoré. And I was reading, again, trying to get a sense of where you Syracuse fans are at with this team. Hit that subscribe button as well. And I know there's some of you who view him more as a 4 than a 5, and that's understandable. What I will say, as somebody who watched a decent amount of Georgia Tech games last year, is he played mostly as the 5, and I know some of that is because Amu Chekwa was off the team, and he was their starting 5. And then Mutombo was kind of in and out of the lineup, so he's kind of forced to play the 5 a little bit. But when he was playing with Dongo, a lot of times Traoré was the one who would take the matchup with the opposing team's 5-man. So I think he'll be just fine playing the 5 for Syracuse. And I think that's where he'll fit in best, because offensively, I don't know if he's going to be able to stretch the floor. It's not something I saw from him in the past. So I think it makes sense for him to be at the 5. Your backup 5, 15 minutes. You combine that with William Kyle's 22, leaving about 3 minutes for like Donnie Freeman to play the 5. Maybe that's how you free up some space. You get Sadiq White at the 4. You play a little bit faster. I think that's going to be an opportunity for Syracuse this year. And my 9th guy, I went with Tyler Betsy. I think he will provide some depth, some size at the 4 spot, 6'8". I think it's going to be important to have that size again, because you're not going to have the true 5 out there. Which does mean, though, a guy like Luke Fennell, who had a really good showing in the U19 World Cup, I think he's just outside the rotation, but again, if there's an injury to one of the wings, he'll be ready to step right in, and I don't think you lose much having Luke Fennell. There's a lot of people very high on him, and the only reason I have him out of the rotation is just the depth of the wings. But I could certainly see him cracking the rotation, taking some minutes from other guys. It's just when you look at this roster and you think George and Starling are going to play the minutes. I took Starling down a minute or a minute and a half from what he's played the past couple of years for Coach Autry. Maybe he doesn't play him quite as much because of the depth of this team, and that could be how you get to a 10th guy in Luke Fennell. But the other guys out of the rotation, as far as I see it, Bryce Zafir, Aaron Womack, and Tifing Diawara. Diawara is the most intriguing of them to me. True 7-footer, would actually give them size, but he seems more like a project from what I've read than a guy who's going to be ready to play right away. I'm curious, how do you guys feel about Syracuse heading into next season? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, guys, peace.